Thank you for listening to the BjjBrick Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back, my friends, to the BjjBrick Podcast. Today, we are going to talk about training strategies for specific situations. We do not have a guest. Our only guest, I guess, is ourselves. So be prepared for us doing a lot of talking about training strategies for specific situations. And, training. We talk about training. Who is the king of training? Could be Arnold Schwarzenegger. Back in the day, Arnold was Mr. Olympia. And so I'm going to use a Mr. Olympia quote this week from Arnold. Strength does not come from winning. Your struggles develop your strengths. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength. And I do want to go back to episode 329. We had BjjBrick on there. And we were talking about, BjjBrick being an 11-time world champion. Just an incredible martial artist. And like we talked about, the most successful BJJ guy we've ever had on the show. And I remember during Byron's interview, he talked about how he lost, a lot of his matches right off the bat. Went to tournaments, lost the first match. But, he's the epitome of this quote. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength. And, he goes to 11 tournaments, loses 11 times, goes home, probably works on his game, who knows, maybe does a little training strategies for specific situations, comes back, and here he is now, an 11-time world champion. The drive, the commitment that BjjBrick has, that's why he's a world champion.
Yeah, that's a good one. And as we get into this topic here about training strategies for specific situations, some of these situations are, if you're injured or if you can't train but just a few times a month, or like they're kind of a negative thing. I mean, if you look at it maybe a little more positively than that, but they're not something that you would think would be a beneficial thing. And these are struggles and things you have to get through and around. BjjBrick did that. He had some struggles, and we're all going to have not perfect training environments all the time. And so to be able to work through these and work with these to accomplish our jiu-jitsu goals and to reach those things that are definitely something that you have to do. And if you are in your first year of training, I want to just point you towards looking at the audiobook, Your First Year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's about 2.5 hours long. It's kind of like a podcast where it's me. Unfortunately, Joe and Gary aren't on this one, but I kind of outlined everything I wanted to talk about during your first year of grappling, all the stuff you're going to run into, and I recorded it in basically an audiobook format. So I'm just sitting down and chatting with you about your training and how it's going to go, and some things you could expect, and how to have success with that. It's $11.99. There's a link in the show notes to it, or you could just go to the BjjBrick shop. It'll pop right up, and you could download it to your listening device from there. And it's been helpful to people, and we hope to help you get a great start with your jiu-jitsu if you're in that first year of training.
Yeah, and don't think if you're nearing the end of that first year, or even if you started your second year, that there's nothing in the book that could help you. I'm looking at the table of contents and the chapters, finding the right gym for you. That's important in the beginning, but you may be a year and you're switching gyms and you never give that much thought. Chapter 4, techniques and positions to focus on. That's not just a first year issue. So, go ahead and pick up this book even if you're a year in. It'll be a benefit to your training.
Even if you're 4 or 5 years in, we got President's Day coming up here in February. And, that's a good time to give a President's Day gift to some of your training partners. Definitely check it out. And it makes, like I said, a good President's Day gift.
I only give audiobooks out as President's Day gifts anyway, Gary. It's kind of a tradition we have. So thanks for the reminder.
You're welcome, Joe.
Guys, I have a very quick off-the-mat lesson here.
That's what she said.
We'll make this quick and painless.
That's what you said.
I run or jog would be a better description, like 2 or 3 times a week. And the reason why I do this, as the weather gets worse and as I don't get a lot of joy out of jogging, is because I have a dog that loves it. And if I'm kind of on the fence about it or whatever, I'll look at her and, did she exercise today? And sometimes I'll go play ball with her, and that counts. But a lot of times it's like, I just got to go run 2 or 3 miles with this dog. And it gets me out there. It's really good for me. It's really good for her. She's wagging her tail the whole time, loving this situation. And I just think about with jiu-jitsu and incorporate it into your life, find ways to make it easier for you to go train. So if you're thinking about how, man, I'm just not feeling it today or whatever, maybe just do that first step is like, you know what? I'm not going to train super crazy today. I'm going to learn some technique and hang out with my buddies. And then, so both time when that happens, you get to the rolling session, like, yeah, I'm ready. It kind of switches. But just find ways. Most of the time when I go run with the dog, about a mile in, I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling good. I'm liking this. This is better than I thought it was going to be. Find ways to make it easier for you to get to the mat. And for me, finding a way to make it easier for me to run my butt around the block a few times has been my dog, and she's been a great help for me. Hey,
Joe, didn't you say something, I don't know if it was on Facebook, on our page here not too long ago, that, is some days you just don't feel like training, and you kind of almost have to talk yourself into it. But once you get there, like, has anybody ever said, I've never... Like, it turned into a great training day. Didn't you say something about that? I think it was awesome. It hit the spot.
Yeah, I'm at an age and a point in my life where sometimes I don't feel like going, but every time I go, I'm like, man, I'm glad I went. It just never fails. I also thought, because we've got an article about eating better here coming up quickly, and I also thought about, I've never prepared it and eaten a good meal and regretted it either.
Oh, yeah, true.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I have stopped by McDonald's before, and 15 minutes later, like, damn it, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah. I've tried to prepare a good meal and screwed it up and regretted it.
Yeah. But, Joe, that really hit the spot, and I think a lot of us can relate to that, because when you posted that and you started talking about it, it made me think about myself. And there are a lot of times where I was like, man, I really don't want to go to jiu-jitsu. I'm tired. Who knows what, I don't want to go. And I kind of force myself to go sometimes. And then once I get there and as I'm leaving, I'm like, man, this was a good day. And some days, I know what you just said, Byron, some days you may not, be in the best shape or feel the best and go super, competitive 100%. But man, just getting there, some days are going to be, you might only go 50%. Your body's not there, but you're still learning. And, the best part, even besides learning, you're hanging out with your buddies, your teammates, your friends. And every time I go to jiu-jitsu that I don't really feel like going, I come back and, I'm in such a better mood. And I say the same thing as Joe. It's like, man, I'm glad I went.
And since you've proved that to be true, at least for me, that makes it easier for me to drag myself to the gym, because I know already that it's tough going, but in 2 hours, I'm going to be glad I did it. Like I said, I'm going to feel better. My mind's going to be clear. So, yeah.
Yeah, and we're talking about getting over some hurdles to training. I think that kind of leads us to our topic of training strategies for specific situations. This is something that Joe came up with, and we've had time to think about a little bit. But one of the most common ones or specific situations is when you're injured or a little banged up. And those are two different things, but they could be similar. Guys, do you have any experience with this? And I know you do. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I'll let Gary take this one. He's probably got the most experience.
Yeah, I get injured. I don't take time off, and my injuries last forever and keep coming back.
He's got injuries from kindergarten that he hasn't let heal yet.
Yeah,
and that was probably 60 or 70 years ago.
I mean, that's how I am. I mean, I love this sport too much, and I don't always make the best decisions by taking time off. But I do believe, and I kind of do an assessment. If I'm hurt, can I work from my back? Can I work from top position? What position does not affect this injury, that I have going on? And I may not be able to roll, but can I drill? And it seems like I can always find some position I can work in. And I'll tell my training partner, hey, my hamstring's kind of messed up today. Is it okay if I work from the bottom? And it just seems like I can always find a spot I can work in. And, the positive I've found of, me being stupid and not always taking time off is my game has got better because I have to work from different positions that may not be my best positions. Byron will tell you that, I had a rotator cuff tear and I didn't get surgery. It wasn't a full tear. And they said I could do rehab, and basically it was the same amount of, they told me you get surgery, you're out 9 months. You do rehab, you're out 9 months. So I was out 9 minutes and, kept training the whole time, but I couldn't lift my arm up. So what I did is I would just kind of pin my arm into my body while I rolled and kind of almost rolled one-handed, and, I could still use the other arm a little bit, but man, my underhooks got great, just because I was kind of using a short arm on one side. So I got a killer left underhook. So there are some positives if you can find a way to train. It's kind of like backwards grappling. It puts you in different positions.
Yeah, I agree 100% on your underhook, and I do remember watching that develop. I won't pass Gary's guard unless I have the underhook controlled. Like, there's just no point. If I basically passed and on the underhook, I need to stop and make sure he doesn't have that, because it doesn't even matter to pass his guard. I don't have the skill or ability to keep Gary in side control. If he has an underhook, he's either gone or taking advantage of it. And so, that's knowing something about your personal training partners, but also his need to play that game a lot. Man, that thing blew up, and it's pretty dang annoying. My thing about training Andriod is you don't want it to be worse when you leave the mats. You want to be healing every day. And so if you think you're going to be probably going to be more sore tomorrow than I am today, you probably should take the day off or train in a way that won't happen. And Gary, you hit the nail on the head. We enjoy jiu-jitsu. It's fun. And so to stop going is not fun. It's a discomfortable thing. Like, man, it's kind of like I'm not doing one of my favorite things. And so it's hard to not go when you feel pretty good or you feel almost ready. And so when you run that little range, you need to find ways to make it as safe as you can. And Gary, communicating with your training partners, that's a big one. And letting them know, hey, man, my neck is really sore lately. If you could not, guillotine me or neck crank me for a little while, I'd really appreciate that. That's all you need to say. And then the people will avoid that, or if they start to do it, they'll hey, remember my neck, or just tap right away and say, man, remember my neck is sore. Hopefully you're not training with jerks that just want to submit you at any given chance.
Well, remember, too, if you tell somebody, hey, my neck is sore, please stay away from it. I don't want you to come at that guy like a wounded cougar and can opener right off the bat. So, you need to be a good training partner also.
Yeah, one thing I would add as far as getting through injuries is if you're injured to the point where you can't drill at all or do any of that, and it's going to go on for an extended period of time, I think showing up at the gym is still important.
Awesome.
It keeps you connected socially, and there's still a ton you can learn from watching. And so, yeah, if you're going to be out 4 or 5 weeks, I would not take a month and just not be at the gym. I'd still go once a week and watch class and stay connected with my coaches and teammates.
That's a great point, Joe. You can always learn from watching, and you're still going to see what the instructor is teaching, and keep you moving forward.
Yeah. One other tip that we've shared before in the podcast, but it's been a little while, is to somehow highlight your injury. We have some training partners here that will wear like a sleeve on one of their arms if their shoulder or elbow is bothering them. I've got a training partner that has an injured thumb. And I keep asking him, put tape on that thumb, tape it up. That way, and there's no point to the tape. It's not going to help him. But I want to know which thumb it is. I'm not going to remember while we're rolling. and not grab that hand, or, I'm not going to grab his thumb, but I do grab hands quite a bit, kind of control the back of somebody's hand, and I'm not going to grab that hand. So he doesn't tape his hand or tape his thumb. I don't grab either one of his hands because I can't recall in the heat, like I just don't, that's something that I would like him to do so it would help me. But if you're able to also show or remind your training partners of what could be injured or what's bothering you, make it easy for them if you can.
Like I know when Byron injured his thumb, or actually it was, I think, not your thumb, but one of your fingers.
Okay.
Injured it pretty bad. And what Byron was doing, he kept training, but he wore a catcher's mitt on that hand to let me know that was the correct one. So great job, Byron.
I routinely put the whole mitt over his face.
Submission by smother.
So another specific situation we might end up getting into is you want to do a tournament. So you're prepping for a tournament. You guys have any advice for somebody who's prepping for that tournament?
Well, I would say if you consider prepping for a tournament, I hope you're a couple months out. I don't know if you decide to take one in 2 weeks. That's pretty last minute. So let's say you're a couple months out. I think you need to identify if you're going to add or change anything in your game right away. I think that should be part of your strategy, because you don't want to wait till 2 weeks before the tournament and then think, oh, man, I don't have a decent mount game. I'm going to start working on that. So if you're going to make any changes, do it early in the process. And by 2 or 3 weeks out, you should really have things narrowed down to what your main game is going to be and what you're focusing on.
And I think this is another thing. We go back to communication. Communicate with your training partners. If you're doing a tournament, there's probably some other guys on your team doing a tournament. But communicate with your training partners. Are you trying to work, specific positions? Like Joe said, you're already thinking about your game. Are you adding? Are you tightening stuff up? Do you want to work position specific? Tough to say that word. Are you really looking for, competitive 100% roles? I know you probably don't want that all the time. You're going to need some rest, but you need to, have a game plan. This is what I'm working on today. You need to communicate that with your training partners and make sure your training partner knows that, hey, I need you to give everything you've got today. Today, I'm, mirroring that I'm actually in a tournament.
Except the fact that you're going to change the way you train a little bit, and then and maybe focus on some things. You guys really hit the nail on the head on those. So here's one that we run into, and this is almost one of the most common questions I think we get as far as like an email question, bjjbrick@gmail.com, or a Facebook message where people ask us something, is they can't train as much as they want to. And the example we have here, you train like 4 to 5 times a month. So once a week, and maybe 1 week you get in twice, like not very much. I think twice is kind of the twice a week. That's okay, but if you could train 3 times a week, 4 times a week, that's fantastic. But sometimes you could just train once a week, and that might be, schedule. It might be your body doesn't like to train more than once a week. It could be the schedule of your work or your home life, or the school doesn't match up with your schedule or whatever. But reality is you're only able to get in there once a week, maybe a little bit more. One of the things I do or recommend is when you're in there, be present. Pay attention,
awesome. Focus,
have goals, have objectives while you're training and rolling. And then the last big one is if you could do it physically, and if your body is the reason why you can't train more than once a week, maybe it's not your option. But if you're physically able to do it, roll extra rounds at the end of class if it's possible. Because let's say we roll 4 rounds. After class, I roll 2 extra rounds. That's half a class worth of rolling compared to the 4 that I rolled. So in the course of that month, I'll have rolled, many extra, added up to be extra class sessions of rolling worth, or maybe not rolling extra rounds, but do a little bit extra review or positional stuff or learning while you're there. Be there 100%. Be focused, and that's the time where you really need to button down. When you're only there a little bit, you need to make the time count.
When we put together this list, I was only thinking of how to make the best of each of these situations. not necessarily how to change these situations, but as we're looking at this one, I'm remembering that last week Byron and BjjBrick talked about doing what you can in your off-the-mat life to make it easier for you to get on the mats. And so that's something I would add. If you're only training 4 or 5 times a month and it's because of schedule, is there something you can do to lighten your schedule or change things? If there's a noon class near your work, but you just don't have a long enough lunch hour, can you talk to your boss about coming in 15 minutes early and taking an extra 15 minutes at lunch? If it's because of things that you've got going on at home, can you consolidate some things that are spread out through the week to, it'll take some doing, but is there a way that you can free up an extra 2 or 3 days a month to train?
Joe, that is a great point. I didn't even think of it that way. And, that maybe that should be the first thing we look at. I like your point about, come in 15 minutes early and take an extra, 15 minutes of lunch. Great idea there. I think another thing is, watching matches, watching videos, Byron, you talked about review, even doing stuff like yoga. Can you do a yoga tape at your house? You probably, if you're running into a kid situation, you got a lot of family stuff going on. Maybe after the kids are asleep, do some yoga. Which is going to make you flexible, keep you, injury free, make you strong, which will help your game. And even if you just do some shrimping in your house, at your house, in your garage, in your basement, in your living room. Shrimping, just movements that are related to jiu-jitsu will help your game a little bit there also.
So, Gary, speaking of that, I'm at work right now. And when I'm at work, I stay in a little 2-bedroom apartment, and the front room is set up combination, living room, office, kitchen. It's pretty sparse. But it's in the center of the floor next to me? A 5x8 piece of mat that I keep at the apartment, and when I'm not at work, I take it back to one of the bedrooms and shove it under the bed. When I come to work, the first thing I do is drag it out in the living room, and that way I can do, like you say, shrimp in place, bridges. It's big enough to do backwards rolls, So, yeah, if you can't make it to class as much as you'd like, if you can do jiu-jitsu specific individual exercises at home, I think goes a long ways.
Do be careful. Joe one time cut himself in a triangle, and he was lucky that the neighbor heard him struggling because I think he would have died.
He was caught.
I couldn't tap fast enough.
and you couldn't even let go. It was stuck.
Both arms tied up.
Yeah. So be careful doing that, guys.
Hey, Joe,
yes, sir.
Another training situation. You're the oldest guy in the gym. And, me and Joe are a lot of times the older individual there. And it's a little bit different. I can think of how I would train if I was 22 years old. But, being the old guy does make it a little bit different.
It does. And my first piece of advice to everybody is, for the older guys, to present a demeanor that's not threatening or challenging. And
are you threatening me?
Well, considering the distance between us, I feel pretty safe right now.
Well, even if I was in front of you, you'd probably still be pretty safe.
Well, maybe. But, a lot of old guys are worried about injuries, and they get in these death matches with guys that are 25 years old. And I personally just avoid that by – I'm not challenging anybody. I'm not trying to prove that I'm the toughest guy in the room. And I think my demeanor communicates that. And I also have developed a relationship with my training partners. They know I'm not going to blindside them. I'm not going to come in and say, let's roll light tonight. I'm kind of feeling old, and then jump on their back and neck crank them. And I think if you do that, if you have that relationship with your teammates, you'll be able to train smart and train safe.
I'll take it kind of the Ronald Reagan strategy, and I'm not going to hold your. I don't recommend that you hold your training partner's youth and inexperience against them. They'll get there someday.
Yeah. Yep. They'll get old and wise.
Yeah. But I know we've talked about this a couple other times. It's communication too. I think it's very important as we age, and as we get older, we are going to have some dings, be dinged up a little bit. Our neck may hurt, and we are going to have times where it's like, hey, Byron, can you please stay off my neck? My neck's bothering me a little bit. I guess it kind of goes back to what we were talking about when you're injured. So that is going to happen, and we have to train smart. If we keep injuring the same thing, we're not on the mats. It's going to hurt our game. So communication with your training partners, with your coach. I've had I can go back to this, and I had a gym that I didn't feel was very old person friendly, and when we were doing warm ups, I remember one day I had a little tweak in my calf, pulled a muscle in my calf, and during the warm ups, while everybody else was doing jumping jacks, which is something that's definitely going to bother my calf, I was over on the side. I didn't participate. And my problem was I didn't communicate, but I didn't do jumping jacks. I was over on the side stretching, and the coach yelled at me. And, to be honest, it kind of peed me off. But, maybe I should have communicated a little bit better. But sometimes we are not going to be able to do something due to a little tweak injury or whatever, and we need to communicate, whether it is our teammates or our coach.
So sometimes being the oldest guy in class coincides with being the worst student in class as well. And
I see no relation. That doesn't make any sense.
No, so we've got on here, we could talk about strategies you can employ if you're the lowest ranked, least experienced student in class, or if you're the best, because each of them presents unique challenges. And I'll go with if you're the newest or less experienced one. Your options are fairly limited. You're not going to be able to go in and direct the role to a specific position. You're kind of a ragdoll sometimes for a while. And one thing that happens then is you can get discouraged because you go week after week after week. You're not getting any sweeps. You're not getting any passes. You're certainly not getting any submissions. You're on the losing end of all those battles, and it can get discouraging. So one thing I would say is to be analytical about your roles and to look for small victories. Look for a time where a guy pulls guard and he submits you 3 times every 5 minutes. Man, if you can start to minimize that, if you can start to make that guy go to a second option, if you can, you're staying safe, it's taking guys more time and more work to isolate an arm or set up a triangle or whatever they're doing. You look for those small ways to assess your progress, and you just take stock in that, and eventually another guy's going to join the gym, and then he's going to be the new guy.
Joe, I like what you said, take the small victories. And, one of them you said you make the guy go for a second option. And that is, I've used that myself. I thought that was pretty cool. It's like, hey, he normally finishes with this. But, I defended well, and he had to go, to this arm bar, let's say. Small victories. Like maybe today, I got a hook in and I got close to passing, but then I got smashed, or, whatever it is. But we also have to remember, when we're the better guy, we need to be talking up our teammates. And, I know Byron and I've rolled with both Joe, and I've seen both of them do this. But, when we're, much better than our training partner, always give feedback, hey, man, you did some great things this time. And that's going to go a long way for, the worst person in the class,
Gary,
maybe. Yeah.
I just realized that you always do that to me. You're always just so positive to me and trying to find things to compliment me. So I just now realize where I sit. Byron, great job trying to get out of the Kimura. You really tried hard.
Yeah. But, I mean, those little things go a long way, and our job is to grow jiu-jitsu and, grow your class, grow your team. And, that worst person, could be the best person a year down the road, and he or she is going to make everybody better in that room. So we need to grow a village, and that's one of the ways to do it.
Yeah, that's definitely a longer term strategy, but I think it's a great strategy. If you're the best person in the room, if you take 6 months and just dedicate that towards making all of your training partners better, I mean, it might seem counterintuitive because you're taking 6 months and you're not working on your own game. But as they all catch up to where you are, it's going to force you to get that much better. So what do they say? A rising tide lifts all boats?
Indeed it does. I look at this one, the best and the worst, and think about them training together. And because there's always some degree, like rarely are we equally matched. And it's really up to the person who has more control of the situation. So typically the better or bigger or stronger, whatever the advantage is, person. It's important to me, and I'm making a video on this, and I haven't made as many videos as I'd hoped to lately. Been kind of busy, but I'm hoping to release a few more videos on YouTube.
Well, you've made a lot of private videos. You just haven't done the ones you'll put out there.
Because you keep coming over, Gary, so we might as well do those. It's important that both people get to do jiu-jitsu. And so if Gary is rolling with a new person and Gary taps that person out 5 times in 5 minutes, and that person has gone from neutral spot to bad spot to tapping out, over, repeat, rinse and repeat, that's a frustrating experience that doesn't really allow that person to actually do jiu-jitsu. Or maybe Gary just holds somebody down in side control the whole time, or Joe rides knee on belly for 5 minutes straight.
Wow.
You both need to be doing jiu-jitsu.
And then we jump up and throw our arms in the air like victory.
Walk around the mat with your arms.
Another gym win.
So as the person who is a little more skilled or able to do that, I'm not advocating play with kid gloves and not roll hard ever.
Catchers, man.
But let the other person do some jiu-jitsu too. So me and Joe are rolling. He beats me up for 5 minutes straight. That kind of sucked. Maybe around that 3 or 4 minute mark, he lets off the pace a little bit and lets me try to work some of my game. And just that little gesture to your teammates that aren't as physically capable as you, it really stands out a lot to them, and it means a lot. That's one of the things that frustrates my wife. It's not that she, loses or gets submitted on the mats. Is that if she does a whole round of jiu-jitsu, a 5 minute round or whatever, 6 minute round that we're doing, and she doesn't get to actually do anything that she wants to try to do. Like, she likes to do Kimura. She likes to do guillotine. She's trying to work on her omoplatas. She has things she wants to try. And if the entire time all of these things are shut down and she is in side control in the bottom for the whole time, she is very frustrated when we leave the mats. It's like, I didn't get to do any jiu-jitsu. That's not her fault. I mean, she could say that to them. Hey, man, can we train? Or I've told her, you could tap and just restart, or be like, something that would speak volumes is you say, if you tap and like, I'm done with this round, and just sit out the rest of that round and let that person think about like what happened. And if they're proud they made her quit, she won't do it. She's too stubborn. She won't quit around. But it's important. So as I see this from her perspective, both people need to do jiu-jitsu to have a good training environment. I'm not advocating go super easy on somebody either, but if you're done with your 5 minute round and you're the only one that got to have any offense or fun or whatever, you probably didn't do it right.
Yeah, so here's a little something interesting to add to that. That's a great point, Byron, and I agree with you 100%. But nobody likes to feel like they're being patronized, nor do you like to feel like you're rolling with somebody who's disinterested and disengaged.
That's true.
I think so. For the better students, I think being able to give your training partners a chance to work without them knowing it. I like when I have a good roll with my coach and I'm like, yeah, I'm not really sure if he gave me that escape or, I like that. Like I did work for it and I don't feel clear like he just gave it to me.
Yeah. One thing that I do, I don't know if it's how similar it is I give positions a lot, but I fight hard out of submission. So I do get caught, like you give people positions enough and you're going to get tapped. But I think they always feel that fight coming out of it, trying to defend it. But they get to attempt the move. They get to, somebody gets a bow and arrow on me. It doesn't matter what color the belt is. I'm in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I've seen this quote from Gary Tonin a couple times, and he talks about, when he's training, here's a guy who's, arguably one of the best grapplers out there. And he talks about when he trains, he's getting submitted constantly, with his training partners. And, he puts himself in bad positions. He's always going to probably be, well, I guess at the Danaher Death Squad, you're never going to be the best in the room. But, he's always, probably going against guys that aren't as good as him, but he's not afraid to try things, not afraid to put himself in positions. And I've seen him talk about that a couple of times. I thought that's great when he talks about how many times he gets tapped out in training. And I think that's why he's so good. He's putting himself in some bad positions and seeing if he can get out of it.
Yeah, that's a good way to train. Here's one that I ran into, and it's kind of an odd situation that I know Gary and I had fairly early on, is when an instructor couldn't make it to class, hey, teach the class. And the issue I would always try to, my biggest struggle was I wanted to show like everything or whatever you wanted to learn. So what do you guys want to learn? And then you get some barrage of stuff that you don't really necessarily have great answers for. Or, hey, guys, come in. I'm going to show you this whole takedown series. It's phenomenal. It's elaborate. It's crazy. And I think the best advice I have for anybody who's being on short notice, hey, would you run the class for me, please, is to just keep it a normal class. Like the class isn't expecting anything super crazy. Have a plan. Have a few techniques you want to show, and run through those. And don't think that this has to be your breakout moment as really teach the class something amazing. But do your best. Put that effort in. Have a little game plan. Show stuff that you're good at doing. I think that's important as well. Just make it easy on yourself. You're not struggling to figure out what actually is happening. But occasionally you could be put in a spot where, hey, would you run this class? Do you guys have any advice for that situation?
I'm not good enough. Nobody's ever asked me to run a class, Byron.
Byron, I have a question for you. So when you start running the class, maybe you start running it on a regular basis. How do you balance your own training with running the class?
That's interesting. I think so when you're running a class, you analyze things more, and you have to explain them, as you're showing the technique. And I think that helps you kind of dive in a little bit deeper into your own understanding of something. And let's just say, hey, we're going to do guillotines from standing. I'm comfortable with that. I would like to show that, the counters, how to pull it off, how to finish it, whatever. But I also might watch a few videos about guillotines from standing and maybe pick up a couple tips. Oh, this is different. And so maybe just grow my own knowledge base, just kind of around that topic. But your own training, get some reps in, but I think it's more important if you're teaching the class to be teaching the class and to be watching and making sure the students are doing it correctly, and then grab one of the students and do it a couple times yourself and make sure that it's going good for you too.
I like what you're saying there, Byron. You have to go a little more in depth. It could be your move that you're really good at, that you're known for, but when you're teaching, your brain has to work a little bit differently. You're trying to convey that, and it just seems like from teaching, you get better at the movement, just trying to convey it, or you may see little things that, can make this game better. Little things that maybe you forgot about, that's going to make it better. But then on top of that, you're doing some research. You're not, especially if you did get a little bit of time beforehand, say you're teaching the class, you're doing a little bit of research and, finding different ways, and, your mind is staying sharp. You may not be rolling as much or drilling as much because you're teaching, but you're seeing different ways to do it. Kind of like what we were even talking about when you're injured. you still show up to class and you still watch, and you're simulating that way.
Yeah. Hey, and it's a little different if you're asked like last minute, hey, instructor's sick, will you go in and train and run the class? Or like maybe you've been asked to teach a weekly class and you're going to do your best, but it's a weekly thing where you gotta show up and have a kind of a game plan for that week. And Gary's a big advocate of training that weekly method.
Very weekly.
What's the next one on the list there, Joe?
How to train when Joe's in town. Well, I'm in town weekly, so.
Yeah, I think if Joe's in town, we're going to skip training. We're going straight to the bar.
Is there a skate park nearby?
We'll find you one, Joe.
All right.
Yeah, we do have some skate parks in town.
We'll go to the skate park, and we'll grill some hamburgers while Joe's skating and have some good times.
So,
well, I know one thing. When Joe's in town and he grapples with Gary and Byron, it's easy for him to identify some weaknesses in his game.
Hold on a minute, Joe. You're moving on to the next one. I do want. So I put this one on there as a joke. How to grapple. So we have a little list of topics here, and I snuck that one in there. I didn't know when you would see it. But here's the deal: you're going to make friends in jiu-jitsu, and some of these friends aren't going to live near you. They're going to come into town and train, maybe Christmas time or once a year that you see this person. And sometimes they're going to be like really good. Sometimes you're going to, have the advantage on them, whatever. But to me, this is always fun to train with somebody. Like we have Jason Burchard. He lives in Kansas City. It's a couple hours away. We see him a couple times a year. When he's in town, I know I'm going to get a good roll. I know some of Jason's game, but definitely not all of it. I know he's always developing and working new stuff. And I need to bring the stuff I've been working on to him in order to have any success at all. And so when you get these relationships built, and then if Jason's going to be in town, I'm going to try to be there that day. If Joe's going to be in town, I need to be ready. Knee on belly, good side control. He's going to smash my half guard. And I'm not going to use half guard against Joe. It doesn't work very well. I've tried it, and so. Kind of knowing a little bit about somebody. This isn't somebody you train with regularly, but having a little bit of knowledge and knowing what to, that you're going to get a good roll. And that's always a fun experience for me to present somebody, here's my good game that I've been working on while you've been away. And it's just kind of a fun experience.
Well, Byron, let's say, you're talking about Jason Birch or Joe coming to town. You know their game. But what about the person you've never seen before? You don't even know them, and they show up for your class, and they got a nice shiny purple belt on, and you've never rolled with them. How are you going to roll with that person?
You just kind of you feel it out. You kind of shake hands and start to roll. I'm always a little bit cautious. I don't want to have anybody just like crank something crazy on me, but I don't start super fast either. Yeah. It's kind of like getting to know somebody. Or going on a date. You don't approach a date with, such ferocity like a Joe would. like
caveman style.
Yeah, like you want to. Usually, the first minute of the roll is the slowest minute of the roll, and you could speed it up a little bit. But if I don't want to have that person launch themselves at me with 110% effort, if they could even do that, and injure me. So I'm my defenses are up, my offenses are down. That's how I would describe it, I guess.
I like it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Gary, you've mentioned several times communication being key, and I think that's applicable here too. When I'm rolling with somebody that I've not seen before, there's always a few moments right before the round starts where you can ask them, how long you've been training, where do you train at? You get a little feel for things before you actually start the physical confrontation.
Yeah. And Joe, you made a point about not being intimidating. I forgot how you said it, but
well, I know that's difficult for you, Gary, but you keep working on it.
But yeah, I like what Byron said. Your defense is up and your offense is down. I like that.
Just to start off and be...
That could be the quote. Yeah, to start off. And normally, like what you said, that's the first minute is the slowest minute. Everybody's feeling each other out. And, if you're the higher ranked person, maybe match the pace, if you're going to let the person control. But I like that. I thought that's a great quote.
I think it could be totally different if you're competing. So you cross the mat, you're looking at Gary, the referee says go. There's no reason to not have your offense up and try to get your game going first.
Yeah.
But we're talking about meeting somebody at the gym and rolling new purple belt, black belt, whatever. Kind of be ready for whatever because you don't know this person. And I think a lot of times, like when I went to Iceland, they paired me up with the black belts first and then a couple of brown belts. And they kind of watched me. And as they realized I wasn't trying to kill anybody, and I was, laughing occasionally and smiling pretty much the whole time, that I was able to roll with anybody in the room, and from blue and white belts as well, and that sort of thing. Is like, okay, this guy's not going to be a problem. His jiu-jitsu is not that great, or he's not trying to kill anybody. One or the other, or maybe both. But I think that they did a good job of kind of protecting their students from somebody who they didn't know which was me, how I would react, and they didn't give me like the new person first and watch me injure somebody. I got to roll with the new people eventually, but I think I had to prove that I'm not here to do anything crazy. And that's just being a good instructor and running a class well. We talked more about this. Joe's in town more than I thought we would.
Well, it was a good one there.
You could go a step further, and we could have added another one for training strategies when you're on the road. I have a friend. I have a friend down here who's a welder, and for a long time now, he's been going on pipeline jobs, and he'll go to Nebraska or wherever and work for 2 or 3 weeks. And the only way he can stay active is to find a gym in that area and train. So that's a unique challenge. He's done a good job.
Joe, I liked when you talked about when Joe was in town, but you also brought up a good point. When you identify you have a weakness in your game, which we've all had that happen. Like, what are some training strategies there?
I think the first thing is to not ignore it. And here's one that I think a lot of people do, and I guess I'm probably guilty of it as well. Let's just say Gary identifies that my leg lock game, I could say defense, but the game itself is probably lacking. Like I could do leg locks on some people. I'm lacking in a lot of areas physically and as well as developmentally on the mats. But my leg lock game isn't close to Gary's, and so I've identified this, and I can ignore it and say, the leg lock game's not my thing, or I could face the fact and say, you know what, this is what I want to do next. And right now I'm doing something else. I'm working on something else, so it's not forefront. But I think within 6 months or a year or so, I'm going to have to take a look at leg locks, talk to Gary a lot, get some more mat time with Gary, check out the Rolly Delgado stuff and John Danaher stuff, and develop a leg game, because I've identified it as definitely not a strength, and it hasn't been a huge weakness except for when I roll with Gary. It's something that I've identified. Hey man, this could be a lot better. And the tools are available for me to learn it, and people have it's that path, the fork in the road. I ignore it and just continue to train what I want to train, or I look at it, accept it, and address it. And if I want to become a leg lock player, I need to do the second step.
Hey, Byron, real quick, off task, but you talked about the road less traveled. Joe, thank you for posting that video for me about the road less traveled in the wood.
Yeah, I was in a wood.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was fun. I had a good trip.
Yeah, that little joke goes back to a couple weeks ago with a quote I didn't necessarily like, and Joe was out hiking in Oregon and found a Y in the road, a Y in the path, and made a little video for me.
And now it's one of Gary's favorite quotes.
Yes. Thank you, Joe.
Hey, so here's a piece of advice about identifying and dealing with weaknesses in your game. If you can find a root cause to the problem, it makes it easier to address it. And what I'm getting at is, if you've done jiu-jitsu for a few years, you already know this, but newer people will commonly be like, I can't escape side control. and that's a problem. And so you need to develop some tools for escaping side control. But you also need to develop some ways to not be in side control. You need to work on your guard retention. Maybe you need to work on your takedowns. If one of your weaknesses is I continue to get caught in triangles, and you just focus on escaping the triangle as opposed to not getting put into it in the first place, then your problem goes from I keep getting caught in triangles to I keep getting caught in arm bars. And when you address that, then it goes to I keep getting caught in omoplatas. And so, a better method is to not get one arm isolated. So I think when you're identifying your weaknesses, dig a little deeper and see what's at the bottom of it.
Ding, 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 ding.
Did he win?
Joe, you won the internet again. I think that's a great point right there. And, I find this happening to myself sometimes. And, I'm like, man, that guy had me in side control forever. I had trouble escaping. But my real problem was my frames were weak. And, as I go back and I start thinking about it, my frames weren't there. I didn't focus enough on frames, and that's why I got passed. And or maybe I focused on frames, but I didn't look for a sweep. I didn't look, for other things to get me out of that position. Sooner or later, if I just sit there and frame, you're going to pass. I need to, work on a sweep, come up with an underhook, get a waist grab or something of that sort. So that's a great way of looking at it, Joe. Great advice right there.
Yeah, this has been a fun episode talking about these different training situations that we're going to find ourselves in from time to time. And, being just open to altering the way you train is going to help you along your journey. And either accept the situation you're in, like, this isn't ideal. I got in twice last month. Not great. I could do better than that. Or maybe you missed a whole month. Get back on that road and take the path to the right or the left or whatever one is more narrow for Gary, and get you going the correct way. But it's just something that none of us are going to have the perfect training environment all the time. Or situation, and so just to deal with these things as they happen. And it doesn't mean you can't reach whatever your goals in jiu-jitsu are, whether it be to lose a little bit of weight, to become better at certain techniques or more proficient in certain things, or to hang in there with the next belt level. Whatever your goals are, you do have to kind of look at the reality of your situation and address the things that are either benefiting you or holding you back a little bit. And I think that helps you out. Guys, we have an article. So we're continuing our non-jiu-jitsu-y articles. And, last week we had one about sprinting and how to, some of the drills that they do and looking at those kind of at the jiu-jitsu perspective. We've had them about rowing and riding a bull and these just random stuff. But this week is a little different. We have one about cooking. And this is on eatingwell.com, which I imagine is a pretty big cooking website. 9 simple ways to be a better cook. And I think we'll find some parallels to being better at jiu-jitsu.
Great article, Byron. One thing I'll say is that most jiu-jitsu athletes are concerned about eating well. And, man, I believe that becoming a better cook is probably the best way to accomplish that. Fast food, instant food that's poorly prepared, that's all not good for us. So this article is good for a couple of reasons.
Yep. Another thing I was going to think of, that you brought up there, Joe, but, cooking, eating well, shopping smart, you're probably going to save money, cheaper than, going to Applebee's every night, cooking at home. I mean, not only are you getting better food, which is going to give you more fuel and make you feel better, but it's going to be cheaper. And what is one thing we hear about all the time? I can't afford jiu-jitsu. And, just by not going out to Applebee's once a week and eating at home, you're probably going to feel better and you're going to have more money in your pocket that you can spend training jiu-jitsu and having fun.
Yeah, good one. I like the tip here. Get the right equipment. And I've experienced this in the kitchen.
You've heard that a lot.
Not everything you could change, Gary. But if you're using like a saucepan and it's a certain situation where you need it to be an even heat. You need the pan to have an appropriate thickness to the bottom, maybe a copper, made of copper, that way it holds the heat evenly or distributes it evenly. Like, these things actually matter. And if you're making macaroni and cheese, it probably doesn't matter. But if you're trying to make some type of a
chicken
caramel
cordon bleu,
or a chicken cordon bleu, via Gary's recipe that's been passed down, these things, the little details sometimes do matter. And it's why sometimes restaurants have a big advantage in their cooking, is because they have high quality, industrial grade cooking equipment, and you go home and you don't. And so the equipment does matter. One of the examples they have is a cutting board. Use the biggest cutting board you can, and I do that all the time. My wife uses like almost the opposite. She'll get out the smallest cutting board she can. I think it's easier to clean and whatever. But the cutting process, I chop stuff pretty quickly, and she does fine. But to me, it's always easier if I have more space to work within. Same thing with jiu-jitsu, as far as like, use the appropriate stuff around you. And so I'm thinking of, if you want to learn, good throws and kind of a judo type style of throw, if you go to a judo place, a lot of them will have like springs under their mat. They're extra cushy to where you could get thrown, 50% more times and have the same amount of impact on your body as if you were at jiu-jitsu, getting thrown less. So that type of environment is beneficial. Also, like the right tools and equipment, like the right people. So, maybe I want to approach Joe and get some tips for passing half guard, where, I go to Gary and ask him, hey man, how do I do these Kimuras? I'm having some trouble. Like, know your resources available to you, and it may not always just be ask the coach. Your teammates are valuable resources. So if your same teammate is triangling you every time and you want to learn how to get out of it, or you want to develop your own triangle, that's the person to ask, because I don't know. I think when somebody does it, it earns a certain level of respect in your head, and you really listen to them with really good interest. Like, this person nailed me with that triangle choke. How did that happen? How can I get out of it? How can I do that? It's just more interesting to you if you've seen it work. And you utilize your teammates as building blocks for you, and also be that person if they ask you questions, and you help them out as well.
Man, keeping this jiu-jitsu related and kind of piggybacking on what you said, Byron, you're talking about the right tools, right equipment. Point number 3 is shop smart, and point number 4 is keep a well-stocked pantry. And relating those to jiu-jitsu, Gary can tell you, when we start jiu-jitsu, it's like we all come in with an empty tool bag, and we need to fill that tool. We need to fill that tool bag up, and so it's as if you're acquiring techniques and skills, and you have a finite amount of resources. It's not money necessarily, but it's time and effort and brain power. You can only learn so many things at one time. And they talk about shopping smart. I would say that's true with your jiu-jitsu as well. In this article, it says half the battle of getting dinner on the table quickly is making sure you don't have to go to the supermarket every other day. And it says the best approach is to make a weekly plan of what you're going to cook, consult with your recipes, write down a detailed shopping list. I think the same organized approach to acquiring techniques is also beneficial. We talked about identifying the major jiu-jitsu positions and having one or two, or preferably 2 or 3 go-to moves from each position. So I think that's kind of shopping smart, getting organized, looking at where your weaknesses are, and making a list of things you need to focus on. And the point number 4, keep a well-stocked pantry. I just think that's, you get your tools in your tool bag, keep them sharp, keep them on the ready, and be smart about that part of the process.
Gary's always developing a weekly cooking plan.
Yeah, always. But the thing is that I do differently is I always read my recipe. And, like you were kind of talking about, Byron, when you were talking about chicken cordon bleu, if you miss something, it may not turn out the same. The recipe, step by step by step. And, same thing with an arm bar. I don't, if I miss a step, Byron, you were talking about passing guard, and keeping that underhook if you lose. And if you got to address that underhook. And if I miss a spot or miss something on my recipe, the chicken may not turn out right. So, if I'm doing an armbar, I need to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and make sure I don't forget something. If I don't address something, the person could escape. So make sure you're doing the move right, you're drilling it right. You're not just, I see this all the time. Hey, let's do some armbar drill, and people are just throwing up arm bars to get the arm bars, but they're not, making sure it's done properly, step by step, making sure, the person's tight, so they can't escape. So make sure you read your recipe, make sure you do it right.
There you go. Nothing like making a whole meal or elaborate dish and forgetting one of the main ingredients. Like, oh, this is what this tastes like without eggs in it. That's usually not what you want to have.
Yeah, you make chicken cordon bleu, but you forgot the chicken.
Or the cordon.
Yeah, or the blue.
We'll put a link in the show notes to this article. Cooking, I classify as a basic human skill. We should all know how to cook some things. We don't have to be great cooks, but it's similar to swimming or self-defense. You should know how to cook some stuff so you can feed yourself. That's pretty simple. So if you're not really into cooking, put a little bit of time into it and be able to cook a few dishes, and it'll be something you could do for the rest of your life. And make it something that you like to cook, and so it's at least delicious.
Hey, speaking of basic human skills, we should have Byron. I've got a question for you, or more likely, I'm going to make a statement and see if you agree with it. A fundamental concept of self-defense forever has been, if you can just briefly incapacitate your opponent or your attacker and then flee, that should be your goal, right? Not to get in a fight and beat somebody else up, but to disengage. And so a lot of the old self-defense seminars, be like upward palm strike to the nose and then run. But even if you're teaching kids not to get bullied or not to get mugged in the alley, you want them to get away from the situation as fast as they can. Same with women under attack. So here's my statement. I want to know if you agree with it. If you can't run flat out for 50 yards and climb over a 6-foot fence and then run as fast as you can for another half mile, or if you can't dodge your way through 4 or 5 lanes of traffic in a downtown situation and slide over the hood of 2 cars and then run as fast as you can for half a mile, I don't care what else you're doing as far as self-defense. I don't think you're being very honest with yourself, or you're doing all that you can to say that you're preparing for self-defense.
Interesting comment there, Joe.
In that situation, Glock 19 solves everything.
That's another very valid point. Yep.
Yeah.
But a half mile is pretty far. Well, dodging traffic is difficult as well. But I do agree with the concept of if you can't get away, your self defense isn't. You're not taking it super seriously. It's good insight there, Joe.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, really, it's put a little bit into fitness. But you need to be able to get out of Dodge when S hits the fan,
as they say.
Yeah, I know a few people that can handle themselves, and those are our Patreon supporters. And I'd like to highlight some of our newer Patreon supporters, Kiki, Rollo, and Lauren. Thank you guys for your support on Patreon. If you do want to support the show, you could pledge a certain amount of money per episode, $1, $2, or $3, and I'll mail you out a BjjBrick Gi patch and our BjjBrick sticker as well. Anywhere in the world, I'll just put an international stamp on the envelope, and it'll be arriving at your address shortly. So thank you guys for the Patreon support. It really helps keep the show going and moving in the right direction down that path traveled by some. Right, Gary?
What's really cool is, I don't know why I never really thought about this before, but this is a free podcast. We don't charge money for the podcast. And what is so cool is people will kick a few bucks our way.
Yeah.
That is just such a unselfish act. And, they enjoy something. They, pay it forward, I guess we'd call it. It's kind of like, walking into a restaurant and somebody pays your bill. But, man, I just never realized, I guess I never really just thought about it. But, man, don't even have the words for it, but it's just so cool that somebody would do that, and to help the show, to make it a little bit better. And man, there's so many good people out there, and I don't know, it's just I don't even know how to say it, but it's just so cool that people would do that. And we appreciate each and every one of you guys. So thank you very much.
Yeah, if you can't afford to pledge a little bit of money per episode,
that's no
listen
problem
and
either.
grow from this as best you can. That's absolutely
Share,
fine.
Yeah, I don't mean anything of the people who don't give to us, because I totally understand that. But if you could share it with your friends too, that would go a long way. We want as many people listening as possible. And we appreciate each and every one of you guys for, tuning in every week. And, going back to things that just blow my mind, 330 episodes, and we've had one every single Monday. That's pretty crazy. I know Byron and Joe put in a lot of work on this. Me, not so much. But, to not miss a week, pretty freaking crazy.
What a great community we have, and we are very grateful for the people that listen. We get email, hey, I love the podcast or whatever. I'm grateful for that. That's amazing. That's very motivating. And then the people that go all the way towards like the Patreon thing, that's really amazing too. But do whatever you can do. We appreciate it, and do that with anything that you enjoy, whether it be another podcast or an artist or a musician, whatever. Support those people. It's a passion project, but a little bit of help goes a long ways, guys. Anyway, stay sweaty, my friends.
And don't forget to slow cook.
Yeah, train hard, train smart, eat good, and get better. We'll see you on the mats, guys.
Gary's a slow cooker, huh?
I don't even know where that came from. That just popped into my head.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.